In this video, I would like to draw your attention to a very interesting biblical story. Or, more precisely, to the sin of our progenitor Eve, which is known only to those who carefully read the Holy Scriptures. So, it is no secret that the first woman succumbed to the temptations of Satan in the form of a serpent and ate the fruit. By the way, it was not an apple at all, from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This, as most believe, was her sin. She took what God forbade her to take. However, Eve's sin began much earlier. And let's find out the details of this episode. In order not to be unfounded, I will cite the dialogue between Eve and the serpent, and you will be surprised to learn what she said. It is described in detail in the book of Genesis. And the serpent said to the woman, "Did God really say, 'You shall not eat from every tree of the garden'?" And the woman said to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, 'You shall not eat of it, neither shall you touch it, lest you die.'" I draw your attention to the fact that Eve for some reason distorts God's commandment, adding that he allegedly even forbade touching the fruit. It is amazingly unreasonable to make the commandment even stricter than it actually was. That is, Eve's first sin, even before she tasted the forbidden fruit, was precisely a lie. Again, I will quote the text of the book of Genesis so that you are convinced that the ban was exclusively on eating the fruit. "And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, Of every tree of the garden you may freely eat. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat of it, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die." We all know the sad consequences of this fall. Our ancestors were expelled from Eden without the right to return. Adam also ate the fruit that Eve brought him. In addition, from now on the following fate awaited them: Adam had to work physically and cultivate the land with his own strength in order to get food. And Eve and her female offspring were punished with the pain of birth. According to the original plan of the Creator, a new person should not have appeared in this world through the pain of the mother. Well, and, of course, another kind of punishment for Eve is her attraction to her husband and dependence on him. Thus, the man began to rule over the woman through whom sin entered man. After all, initially, God, having created the first man, surrounded his life with real abundance. Among other things, God also endowed his creation with free will. Implying by this that Adam is allowed everything, but not everything is useful. If we talk about inconveniences, then such should be considered the prohibition on eating the fruits from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. This commandment implied that on the day when a person violates it, he will certainly die. It is no coincidence that the aforementioned prohibition, which taught a person to be the master of his desires, was the only one. And what else could Adam be prohibited from doing in those happy times? "Do not steal, but from whom? Do not commit adultery, but with whom? Do not kill, whom? Do not envy, whom?" Continuing to gift Adam, God created a helper for him, Eve. And she, too, was forbidden to eat the aforementioned fruits. But, apparently, not at all because they were absolutely inedible. It was simply under that very apple tree that the very same serpent tempter, who served as a blind instrument for demonic forces, liked to spend his free hours. God, like any caring father, forbade his creations from visiting a place that had a very bad image. Moreover, living in heartfelt simplicity and love for the Father, they already had everything one could dream of. However, following the female habit of seeking good from good, Eve soon found herself in bad company. And the poisonous fruit should not be considered the apple, but her conversation with the serpent, who called the father of all things an evil despot and tyrant. Developing this thought and simultaneously trying to evoke pity for himself, the devil put forward the hypothesis that Adam and Eve were created slaves, created for the sake of protecting someone else's property. And the ban on eating the most ordinary fruits was imposed on them only so that they would never forget who was the real master in their heavenly home. Having heard enough of the disgusting lies about God, Eve, returning home, retold what she had heard to her husband. From her, Adam was able to learn about his nakedness. Later, he refused to appear for his first interrogation, citing the fact that he was naked. And during the subsequent interrogation procedure, Adam directly pointed to his wife as the instigator of the crime he had committed. True, this did not help him much. Because no one has ever managed to justify themselves by saying that they were deceived. Having been expelled from paradise in disgrace and awaiting death with horror, Adam nevertheless realized why the forbidden fruits with which his own wife fed him to his fill were called sources of knowledge. The first man understood that to repay good with ingratitude is a grave evil. And abstinence and obedience will always be considered good. But Adam's insight came with a clear delay, because the death sentence, "From the earth you were taken and to the earth you will return," had already been announced by that time. And I will remind you once again that Eve's sin began much earlier, began with the most harmless lie, although in this case there was no point in her lying to her tempter.